Om Stapakaya Chadhamasya Sarvadharmaswarupine Stapakaya Chadhamasya Sarvadharmaswarupine Avatar-varishtaya Ramakrishna te Namah. Asato ma sadgamaya Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya Pratyormamritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let us bow down to Sri Ramakrishna, the embodiment of all religions, the Supreme God incarnate. Let us pray to Him to lead us from the unreal to the real, to lead us from the darkness of ignorance to the light of knowledge, to lead us from death to immortality. Today's topic, the philosophy of Sri Ramakrishna. We need philosophy to sustain our life, to face the crisis and problems and difficult situations. Without the philosophy as a basis, one cannot survive. So, it is very important and essential to have clear ideas about the practice of religion. And we have Sri Ramakrishna now, who has given us the ways of practicing religion in graphic details, and himself has passed through various experiences, and so his teachings have tremendous significance for our life. In fact, we have seen many people who are disgusted and frustrated in the worldly life. They frantically search for peace, and they feel extremely fortunate to come to Sri Ramakrishna to have real peace and joy. So, in the spiritual horizon of Sri Ramakrishna shines as a beacon light to the pilgrim in his life's arduous journey. His brief career of 50 years is an epitome of all the strivings of mankind's soul. It was an incessant quest after truth, with dogged determination and unflagging perseverance. The advent of Sri Ramakrishna marks a new renaissance in the annals of our history. He came at a time which was, as it were, the twilight between the medieval and the modern ages in India. His career was a swelling symphony of spiritual experience, getting culminated in a state of perennial realization. He was delighted in acts of spontaneous service that obliterated all traces of egotism. In fact, one has to be totally free from ego in order to realize God. And Sri Ramakrishna has become the symbol of a person who would be totally free from egoism. Sri Ramakrishna most effectively taught us that self-surrendering bhakti and terrific sincerity can alone lead one to the throne of God. Sri Ramakrishna was a spiritual teacher par excellence. He had realized truth through hard spiritual practices over long hours, and his realizations had proved to him the ephemeral nature of worldly existence. He could have withdrawn himself completely from the world had he chosen to do so, designating it as Maya. People do get out of all the worldly ties and things. They just retire to forest and spend the whole time in solitary meditation. People do like that. But Sri Ramakrishna's immeasurable compassion for suffering humanity would not allow him to do that. He yearned for a band of earnest disciples who would spread his message and bring solace to others through spiritual awakening. Sri Ramakrishna wanted to kindle the spiritual ways of life in people. And in the evenings, when the temple rang with the sound of bells and conch shells during the evening service, he would climb to the roof of the building in the garden and cry at the top of his voice, "Come, my boys, where are you? I can't bear to live without you." A mother's yearning for their child, or that of a lover for his beloved, was nothing before the intensity of Sri Ramakrishna's yearning for his devotees. Sri Ramakrishna's religion, which was founded on the great Vedantic principles, is truly broad-based. It gives a wide scope for each individual aspirant to practice whatever faith he pleases. In his religion, the concept of Ishtadevata, one's chosen deity, has a pivotal role to play. For religion, which demands man's whole being for fulfillment, cannot reach its heights if curbed by inhibitions. Only when it is practiced out of one's own sweet choice can religion bear its fruit. His dictum, as many faiths, as many schools of thought, so many ways of reaching the goal, emphasized the fact that everyone was free to follow the path of that religious practice which appealed to him most. Every great incarnation preaches the doctrine that is most suitable for the age in which he appears. Whoever approaches even one aspect of that all-pervading truth, or succeeds in embodying to perfection one great ideal, be he a poet, a thinker, a philosopher, a scientist, or a saint, continues to live in the memory of humanity, shaping its course and outlook and enjoying an undimming immortality. Sri Ramakrishna's devotion and adherence to the truth were phenomenal. His tremendous love for God was unprecedented. He embodied to perfection a great many of the sublime ideals of humanity. He displays a vitality that defies and eludes the ravages of time. He is, as verily Swami Vivekananda pointed out, the reformed and remodeled manifestation of all the past great epoch makers in religion. In philosophy, we speak of Brahman, Ishvara, the universe, the Maya. All these are important chapters in the study of philosophy. Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya and Madhvacharya, who advocated non-dualism, qualified non-dualism and dualism, they have all dealt with these points. They have approached these in their own way. But Sri Ramakrishna's approach is very distinct and it clarifies all the doubts. It makes possible for everyone to practice Vedanta. And one need not be dogmatic or fanatical about particular system. One could be very broad-minded while practicing Vedanta. And Sri Ramakrishna is the model for us to follow. So Vedanta, therefore, takes a very important place in these modern times. It unifies all the people of all religions. It emphasizes practicality. Be practical in whatever faith you are following. So what is needed is sincerity and practice. That's all. So Sri Ramakrishna places importance to these aspects. Like Shankara, Sri Ramakrishna also accepts Brahman as the highest and only reality. All the Upanishads declare that Brahman is the substratum of everything. Sri Ramakrishna also accepts it. He accepts it as Nirgun and Nirakar, without attributes and without form, in its aspect as the absolute. As absolute Brahman, he is without attributes and he is without form. That is the state of absolute Brahman. But unlike Shankara, Sri Ramakrishna does not accept God, the aspect of Brahman, with form and with attributes, saguna, as either illusory or as a reality of a lower order. To Sri Ramakrishna, God is both with form and he is without form too. Not only that, he is beyond both these two. Sri Ramakrishna says, God is formless and God is possessed of form too. And he is also that which transcends both form and formlessness. He also knows, and the Brahman alone knows what all he is. Nobody can comprehend Brahman, fully. Sri Ramakrishna calls the Absolute as Brahman in its eternal aspect, when it is at rest and inactive. It's called Nitya. The same Absolute in its sportive aspect, when involved in the process of creation, preservation and destruction. Sri Ramakrishna calls the same reality as Shakti or Kali, the same as Ishvara or God. So according to Sri Ramakrishna, Brahman and Shakti are one and inseparable. So the distinction between Brahman and Shakti is really a distinction without a difference. Brahman and Shakti are just as fire and its burning power are one. Brahman and Shakti are one, just as milk and the whiteness of milk are one. Brahman and Shakti are one, just as a gem and its brightness are one. You can't conceive of the one without the other, or make a difference between them. These statements are made by Sri Ramakrishna. You can find them in the sayings of Sri Ramakrishna. God the Absolute and God the Personal are one and the same. They are not different. Belief in the one implies belief in the other. Fire can't be thought of apart from its burning power, nor can its burning power be thought of apart from it. Again, the sun's rays cannot be thought of apart from the sun, nor the sun apart from its rays. You can't think of the whiteness of milk apart from its milky whiteness. Thus, the Absolute cannot be thought of apart from the idea of God with attributes, that is, personal God, and vice versa. So the primordial power and Supreme Brahman are identical. It is like a snake and its wriggling motion. Sri Ramakrishna tells like this about Brahman in the Gospel. So, Brahman in its absolute sense is eternal, Nitya. In the sportive sense is called Leela. Both are same. Both are same. There need not be any conflict about this point. Sri Ramakrishna clarifies it, and he is telling out of his own realization of the absolute reality. He had realized personal God. He talked with Divine Mother, and he had the realization of the highest truth, the absolute Brahman, the non-dualistic state, non-dualism. He reached the zenith. But then, after reaching the highest state, then he is telling to all the people, well, that absolute Brahman is none other than Divine Mother. And Divine Mother is none other than that absolute Brahman. So without the Divine Mother's grace, he could not have realized the Brahman. So how it is very important to understand this point. Once we are convinced of this fact, then it's a great joy. Whether you are worshipping personal God, whether you are worshipping impersonal God, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. What is needed is your practicality in spiritual life. Stabilization of character and earnestness and practice. That's what is important. So, you must know this fact. Fact is this: Brahman and Shakti are identical. They are inseparable. They are inseparable. The whole universe is carrying on its activities because of the power because of the energy. Energy manifesting in different ways, in multifarious ways. Find energy. And that energy is none other than Supreme Brahman. Now coming to Maya, another important aspect in philosophy, Sri Ramakrishna accepts Maya as a veil that keeps God hidden from our sight. He compares it to a small patch of cloud that can hide the big sun from our view, or like the weeds that cover placid water. He also holds, like the Sankhyas, that as soon as Maya is discovered, it disappears. But he is a little more considerate towards this Maya than the Advaitins, because Sri Ramakrishna accepts that Maya has two aspects. One is Vidya Maya and the other one Avidya Maya. The Vidya Maya helps a bound soul to get liberation. How? By giving him discrimination and non-attachment. It is the Avidya Maya manifested as lust, lucre and egoism that really binds him. Again, the explanation which leads to the corollary that a spiritual aspirant should take recourse to Vidya Maya to nullify the effects of Avidya Maya, even as one thorn is used to remove another thorn and then both are thrown away. This adds a new dimension to the philosophy of spiritual practice. By ingeniously avoiding the need to propitiate a personal God, to remove this Maya, the purely Advaitic standpoint is maintained. As regards the locus of Maya, there is no unanimity among the traditional Advaitic schools. But Sri Ramakrishna solves the problem convincingly by saying that it is located in Brahman but acts on the individual souls like the poison of a serpent which is confined in its mouth and yet doesn't affect it anyway, but acts on those bitten by it. He thus absolves Brahman of any imperfection or limitation due to Maya. Maya is Brahman's creation, but Brahman himself is not bound by Maya. Well, the next point, these are all the important points discussed in the traditional Vedanta, Brahman, Maya, creation. Coming to creation, Sri Ramakrishna gives it a much greater degree of reality than Shankar. Sri Ramakrishna calls it a Leela aspect of Brahman, and hence real. It is real but not eternal. That's how Sri Ramakrishna holds. It is like ice crystals appearing in water and again dissolving back in water. The ice crystals are as real as water, but does not endure permanently. A person ascending the staircase to reach the roof of a building denies at first any roofness to the stairs, but he discovers after reaching the roof that the stairs are also made of the same material as the roof. In the same way, though a man of wisdom may deny the world as not Brahman, when he becomes a man of supreme wisdom, through more complete realization, he accepts that the world is also Brahman, because nothing exists apart from Brahman. This theory gives us a greater insight with the help of which we can understand better the activities of one who is liberated even while living. About creation, we have studied how Sri Ramakrishna looks into that. Now coming to next point, Ishvara or God. In Shankara's non-dualism, Brahman the Absolute is not very responsive to human emotions. The Ishvara we bank on is either unreal or has a precarious existence. But according to Sri Ramakrishna, Ishvara, who is Brahman in its Leela aspect, is real and responsive, and hence the entire gamut of devotional practices acquires a validity and leads to the fulfillment. Instead of being a secondary sadhana, as in traditional Advaita, bhakti is a primary sadhana placed on equal footing with jnana. It is equally great and it is equally joyful, and this is achieved within the broad framework of Advaita, which both accept as the final truth. There is God, there is nothing but God only, that everybody accepts it. A person following the path of knowledge and a person following the path of devotion both accept that. Closely connected with the topic is the concept of the avatar, the incarnation of God. Shankara, constrained by the extreme stance of Advaita, which he is obliged to adopt, is very apologetic about the whole doctrine on the Gita. Sri Ramakrishna, however, has no such constraints, since he accepts both the Nitya and the Leela aspects of Brahman as equally real and valid. Once the Leela aspect is accepted as real, there should be no difficulty at all in according reality to the incarnation of God also. God, being omniscient and omnipotent, can do anything he likes. None can put any limitation on his power. If it is his will, he can be born as a human being and sport through it. In fact, he does sport through the human body to bring enlightenment to the bound souls out of his infinite compassion for them. And again, since the incarnation is God himself, seeing him is equivalent to seeing God. The example is given to touch the river Ganga. It's not necessary to touch the entire stretch of water from the Gomukh, where Ganga comes out, the birthplace of Ganga, to the Ganga Sagar, where Ganga joins the ocean. It is enough if it is touched at Dakshineshwar. If you touch water in its pathway anywhere, you are touching Ganga only. Coming to immanence of God. For Shankara, the world is only an illusory appearance in Brahman. Like silver in nacre, Brahman, thus being the substratum of the world, appearance cannot be, strictly speaking, immanent in it. Immanence implies a much greater degree of reality for the substance, in which immanence of the other is recognized. The Upanishads clearly speak of divine immanence in the world and the living beings. You got reference to this in our Upanishads, Taittiriya Upanishad, Chandogya Upanishad. Sri Ramakrishna
teaches not only of divine immanence in all beings and things, but also of its manifestation in different degrees. Sri Ramakrishna says, every object is Narayan, God. Man is God, the animal is God, the sage is God, the villain is God, all that exists is God. The deity Narayan sports in various aspects. All things are his diverse forms and the manifestations of his glory. The manifestation of Shakti, the divine power, varies in varying centers of activities. For variety is a law, not sameness. God is immanent in all creatures. He is even in the ant. The difference is in manifestation only. That's how Sri Ramakrishna explains it. Now coming to the subject, Jiva or embodied soul. Coming to the nature of the Jiva or the embodied soul, Sri Ramakrishna admits that in its essential nature, he is God himself. That's why Swami Vivekananda declared each soul is potentially divine. The soul enchained is man or woman, but when free from the chain, that is Maya, it is a Lord. What is the relationship between the Jivatman and the Paramatman? As a current of water seems to be divided into two when a plank of wood is placed against it, edgewise, so the individual appears divided into two, the Jivatman and the Paramatman, due to the limitation of Maya. It's because of the Maya, this difference is being looked into. Water and a bubble on it are one and the same. The bubble has its birth in the water, floats on it, and is ultimately resolved into it. So also the Jivatman, the embodied soul, and the Paramatman, the supreme soul, are one and the same. The difference between them being only one of degree. For one is infinite and unlimited. That is Paramatman, whereas the Jivatman is finite and limited. So one is dependent while the other is independent. The Jivatma is always dependent. Then what is the cause of bondage? Why people are bound? What then is that causes one's bondage? Sri Ramakrishna attributes it to egotism brought about by avidya maya. On a deeper analysis of this I, it will be found to be non-existent, even as nothing is left over when we go on peeling onion. And yet it can create no end of troubles. Not only that, it's extremely difficult to get rid of ego. How then can we get rid of it? Classifying the ego into two groups, the ripe ego and the unripe ego, Sri Ramakrishna advises to cultivate the ripe ego to counter the unripe ego. If you find that you can't drive off this feeling of I, then let it remain as a servant I. There is not much to fear from the ego, which is centered in the thought, I am the servant of God, I am his devotee. And Sri Ramakrishna gives the example, sweets cause dyspepsia, but not sugar candy, which is an exception. the servant eye, the eye of a devotee, the eye of a child. Each of these is like a line drawn with a stick on the surface of water. This eye does not last long. It doesn't last long. It doesn't last long. In this connection, Sri Ramakrishna gives a unique example as to how the liberated souls continue to live in this world and teach others even after the egoism has been wiped out. As a piece of rope, when burnt, retains its form but cannot serve to bind, so is the ego, which is burnt by the fire of supreme knowledge. Then coming to the embodied beings, Sri Ramakrishna, though conceding that all the jivas in the ultimate analysis are equal, yet classifies them into 4 groups. One is bound. The second is struggling for liberation. And the third, one who has emancipated. And the last one who is ever free. So, these are the 4 classifications. Those of the ever free group are born to teach mankind, just to show the path to spirituality. They come. The first group, that is the group who are bound, is so deeply engrossed in the world of the senses that it is least interested in the life of the spirit. They are not bothered about spirituality or religion. They are just satisfied with worldly activities and pleasures. The emancipated and ever free groups, they have already reached the goal in their lives. Hence it is the struggling for liberation group that needs special attention. A person who has already emancipated, that is over. And the eternally free, that's also over. So, the person who is struggling for liberation, there we have to be concerned with. It is to show the correct way to the people struggling for liberation. God comes and helps in so many ways. Then the goal of life, Sri Ramakrishna says that the goal of life is God realization. Anything short of that will not satisfy the person in any manner, and he cannot be really happy. So, all our miseries will end, all our problems will be solved once for all by realizing God. Until then, all the troubles and problems continue in one way or other. Following the ancient tradition, Sri Ramakrishna advises the aspirant to seek a competent spiritual teacher and then practice disciplines according to the instructions received from the teacher. Sri Ramakrishna's teachings contain a veritable mine of information and instructions on practical spiritual life. Unlike the traditional philosophers or religions, he is not at all dogmatic about the path leading to the goal. Just as the Kali God temple can be reached through several roads of Calcutta, God also can be realized through several spiritual paths and disciplines. In his philosophy of sadhana, jnana, bhakti, yoga and karma all have a place. One can practice them either singly or in combination. What is needed is great earnestness. That you must have. Without earnestness, you will not be able to proceed in spiritual life. That earnestness must be there. In fact, this approach of his can accommodate in its fold not only all the spiritual disciplines of Hinduism, but also those of their other religions also. He goes to the extent of according a place even to the abominable practices of some tantric schools, calling them as backdoors, though he does not advocate or recommend them. As regards the controversy among the various schools about jnana or bhakti being the direct path to liberation, Sri Ramakrishna advocates devotion tempered by knowledge, jnana mishrita bhakti, as most suitable for this age. This standpoint avoids the extremes and prevents the aspirant from becoming dry or sentimental, the dangers to which he is generally exposed to if he follows only one of them to the exclusion of the other. What happens to a person when he realizes God? Here, Sri Ramakrishna follows the traditional description given in the scriptures. The man of realization experiences unalloyed bliss within and sees the divine everywhere. Outwardly, he may not exhibit any signs of his inner joy and may even behave like an abnormal person. But one thing is certain, he remains unaffected by the vicissitudes of life which affect others intensely. He lives in God and works for the good of others, seeing God in them. Sri Ramakrishna says that normally a person who goes into Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the highest state of superconsciousness, remains in that state for 21 days and then passes away. However, a few who are destined to teach mankind return to the ordinary plane of consciousness by keeping a trace of egoism without which corporeal existence is impossible. About prarabdha karma, the result of past deeds that have borne fruit in this life, Sri Ramakrishna accepts it as inevitable but assures us that a greater part of its effects can be offset by the power of God's name. God's name is very powerful. You can undo many things by just repeating God's name with love and devotion. About the problem of good and evil, Sri Ramakrishna says that the very act of creation presupposes imperfection. Just as pure gold cannot be made into ornaments unless it is mixed with traces of baser metals, the world cannot come into existence without Maya. Maya should be there, then only creation will be there. The simultaneous existence of good and evil is to be connected through good as far as possible. But the ultimate solution is to transcend both good and evil by rising to supreme spiritual heights where everything is leveled in God. Then neither good nor evil is recognized, just as it is impossible to notice the difference in the heights of tall trees or clusters of grass when one is flying high in the sky. Finally, there is so much disagreement and difference among the various philosophical systems and religions. Sri Ramakrishna tackles this question from two standpoints. One is the subjective point and the other one objective point. Through the well-known story of the blind man and the elephant, Sri Ramakrishna tells us that when people get an incomplete or imperfect view of God and preach it as the whole truth, conflicts are bound to appear. This is from the subjective standpoint. From the objective standpoint, Sri Ramakrishna says that God is so great that none can comprehend Him fully. He alone knows what all He is. Brahman or God is the one thing that has not become uchishta, that is food tasted and left over. Since none has till now fully described Him, any attempt to size Him up with our limited intellect and describe Him through our limited speech will be as futile as describable. Their descriptions are bound to fall far short of the ideal and are also apt to be different from one another. Sri Ramakrishna's experiences and his utterances, though similar in many respects to the traditional Vedanta, have much more in them that can form the subject matter for a fascinating study, unraveling new vistas of Vedanta. This is how our Sanatana Dharma has grown over the millennia. Sri Ramakrishna has given his own life as the interpretation of Vedanta. So he enjoys the absolute Brahman and he also enjoys the personal aspect of God. So, a person who has realized God, he is the one who is really happy. He enjoys this world more than the worldly man enjoying this world. A spiritual person enjoys the world and he enjoys it so much and he is never restricted in his joy, unlike the person who just ignores the presence of God and enjoys the world. Though both are living in this same world, the attitude, how one looks into this world, it makes a great deal. A worldly man, though he has his happy times, most of the time he is unhappy and always passing through depressions and dissatisfaction. At times she passes through some kind of joy in the life. But in case of a person who is practicing spirituality, he cannot have that kind of ups and downs, because he is always thinking about the glory of God, and to him God is real and God is always present. God is always protecting him from all dangers, and because he is constantly meditating on God and practices all the necessary disciplines in controlling the mind and the senses, then he really attains the highest good. The Upanishads say every person in this world is given the opportunity to choose between good and pleasant. The wise ones, they choose the good, whereas the others who are not so wise, they choose the pleasant. And the Upanishad says a person is given great responsibility, and each person has been given a vehicle to drive his vehicle to reach his ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to reach the abode of God. The vehicle is human vehicle. God has given this human vehicle to everyone. If you don't go towards God, it's your fault. But the vehicle is meant for to go towards God, not to go in any other way. So, it is very important to study this Upanishad, where it clearly explains how each part is playing its role. In the human vehicle, we have got mind, we have got senses, we have got intellect. So, mind is compared to reins, senses are the horses, the objects are the road of the chariot. The chariot has to move in that road. And there is the intellect, the rider. So, how it is important to know this aspect, and you are required to know how to drive the vehicle properly and then reach the goal. So, the Upanishads are clearly stating that the highest good is to see God, to experience truth in this very life, so that you will have complete fulfillment and you feel fully satisfied if you follow the path of spirituality. So Sri Ramakrishna has given us this practical Vedanta, and don't get disheartened. Just keep practicing. Have faith in God. Have faith in the path which you are following. Have faith in the words of the Guru, and then go ahead. You will certainly reach the goal, and finally you will get real peace. With these words, I conclude my talk. Thank you very much. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. May the Lord protect us. May He nourish us. May our knowledge be enlightened. May we not hate each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.